Right. So we are left off with for the virtualized data center in the network part. We are left off with the last topic, that is requirements for network traffic management. Okay. So when you're talking about the network traffic management, so basically it means managing the network traffic. So that network traffic means either that traffic is coming from one VM to another VM, or one VM to a another physical server, or a physical storage, or to other client. Okay, so how actually, or what are the basic requirements for network traffic management is, the basic requirement is first of all is load balancing. So load balancing, when you talk about is, we have to distribute the workload. Okay, distribute the workload across multiple physical servers or between multiple virtual machines. Okay, for distributing workload across these multiple physical servers or virtual machines. Okay, the most required thing is to have multiple parallel network links. Okay, so having multiple parallel links, network links. Okay, so it actually prevents both overutilization or underutilization of these resources. Okay, so it can be either done using it might be either a built-in functionality which is there in the hypervisor or in the physical NIC, or sometimes you have to install a dedicated third-party software to do the load balancing part. Okay. Similarly, the other requirement is the policy-based management. So here, when you're talking about policy-based management, who defines the policy usually? So the network administrator is the one who defines those policies and applies those policies. Okay, so by policies, what it means is, suppose if there is a link between a VM and a physical storage. So if that link has a failure, okay, in that case, to which link that failover has to be passed, means which link is going to be active. If was there in a standby link, or it will be given to already active link, so it will be like an additional load to that particular link. So what defines to which link that particular load will be transferred because a failure has happened in that link is defined using a predefined policies. Okay, and this predefined policy is basically defined by the network administrator. So which basically aim is to distribute traffic. Okay, traffic either coming from VM, okay, or already existing in the network link. If there is a failure, how to uh, do that failover. Okay, means failover means transfer that load to another link when a failure has happened. Okay, so that is defined by the predefined policies. The last requirement for network traffic management is the resource sharing without contention. So resource sharing without contention. So we know that when there are multiple physical NICs, and usually the physical NICs are not shared by virtual machines. So, but the bandwidth of physical network, okay, that is shared, right? So when we are hosting a VM, so there will might be a service level agreement from the user that this much bandwidth I require. Okay, so in order to ensure that guaranteed service levels, okay, it is best to do a sharing of bandwidth. Okay, and this sharing of bandwidth, when we are doing it we should make sure that there is no contention in that bandwidth, because we have to ensure that whatever written in the service level agreement, that has been guaranteed. Okay, so when we are talking about traffic types, okay, so what are the different types of traffic? Okay, so some there is just VM management traffic, there can be migration traffic, there can be IP storage, there can be FC storage access. So such kind of traffics, how much percentage of bandwidth you are going to give based on that share parameter. Okay, so that share parameter also has to be defined and followed. Okay, so we'll see all these things in detail. Okay, so there are techniques to incorporate network management, network traffic management. So these techniques are actually based on those requirements only. So we'll discuss them in detail. So when you're talking about balancing the client workload, so there are two ways to do the balancing of the client workload. Okay, so either provide a dedicated software, or you provide hardware. Through hardware, we can also balance the client workload. So this is going to talk about hardware-based balancing client workload. So when you're talking about the hardware here, so the hardware here is basically nothing but the physical switch or the router. Okay, so when you're talking about the balancing the client workload, so here the main intention is that a load balancing device driver or a device should be placed. Okay, load balancing device should be placed in between the network and between the that it should be placed between the server cluster and the network. So what happens here is, how does it provides that load balancing is, so whatever requests are coming from the network, okay, which have to be serviced by the servers which are there in the server cluster. So instead of redirecting them to that particular request, what this load balancing devices does is, it acts like a virtual IP address. First of all, it will have a virtual IP address which abstract all these server cluster. So whatever client requests are coming from IP network or from the physical network, that is going to be fed to the load balancing device. The load balancing device. Now, this load balancing device govern what packets are to be, or which packets are to be fed to which servers based on some policies. So that policies are nothing but called as load balancing policies. And some of the example for load balancing policies are round robin, weighted round robin, so least connection. So when you're talking about round robin, it means that all the servers will be given the connections all in rotation. Okay, so all the servers will be given the request or the connection from the client in rotation. Okay, so there is no particular priority to any particular server. The next type is weighted round robin. So here in weighted round robin, so sometimes the administration feel that some server can take more workload, but some server can take less workload. So what does the network administrator do is, in this load balancing device, it uses load balancing device to assign some weights to the server. So the servers which can take more load, they will be given more weight, and some servers which are not capable to service, they will be do able to service minimum threshold number of connections, so they will be given a less weight. So based on that weight, the servers will be given the load to service a request which is coming from the client. Okay, so that is weighted round robin. It means weights are given to each particular server based on the capacity of how they can service the request or how fast they can service the request. So based higher weight server will get more number of connections to be serviced. Okay, the other one is least connection policy. So least connection policy, in round robin, what happens is all server in rotations will get the request to be serviced. So least connection is means every service will get some minimum number of connections to be serviced, which they have to respond to. Okay, least connections means all server will get the same number of connections so that it can be serviced. So that is the load balancing via the hardware type. Hardware type means we are going to provide a dedicated software, dedicated hardware to do the load balancing. And so to provide that load balancing, a load balancing device will be placed between the server cluster and the internet. Okay, and this act as a virtual IP address, which actually abstract all of the servers which are there in the cluster. So here, load balancing device decides which or which how many number of requests have to be given to which servers based on load balancing policies. And these load balancing policies are round robin, weighted round robin, least connections. These three we have seen. So the best is weighted round robin because it analyzes the capacity of the server, how much it can perform. So it basically makes use of complete utilization of that particular server resources. Okay, so least connection is every server is given the same number of connection, even if they are, so there the capacity of the server is not analyzed. So the best is weighted round robin load balancing policy. Okay, so this is the hardware based technique. The other technique is the software based. So in the software based technique, we have these two examples. So here a dedicated software will be running, okay, either on the physical or on the physical server or on the virtual machine. Okay, so the first example that is which we are going to discuss is the DNS server based load balancing. Okay, so in this DNS server based load balancing, what it has is, so there will be um, multiple IP addresses. Okay, multiple IP address. The aim here is the multiple IP address will be configured for a given domain name. Okay, for a given domain name. So that domain name will be for a group of servers. Okay, that domain name will be actually for a group of servers. So now, either based on round robin. Okay, round robin, the request will be mapped to different servers. So instead of getting a particular giving all the requests to a particular server, a round robin policy is used. So every server in that cluster will get that particular request on round robin based policy. Okay, so that is DNS server based. So here that software does the load balancing here. Okay, the another one is the Microsoft network load balancing. Okay, so here when we are talking about Microsoft network load balancing, so to achieve this, what happens is in a special driver. Okay, the special driver is installed in the each servers in the cluster. Okay, so in each server in that cluster, special device driver is installed. Okay, so that performs the load balancing. So how does it do is, so uh, the so this though the all of them have each particular device driver, so client will only see one particular server. Okay, and that server might be a server cluster. Okay, now what happens here is whatever incoming packet is there. Okay, so this incoming packet reaches to all of the servers. Okay, reaches to all of the servers. Now the software which is installed, that is a load balancing device software which is installed, that will filter this packet and filter this packet and see whether can this server actually service this request. If it is able to service that request, then it will proceed with the load balancing. So that is the DNS server load balancing. I hope I'm audible. Hello. Or drop. So, so this is the Yeah. So this is the balancing client workload using software-based technique. So I'll just tell you again the difference between DNS server and Microsoft Network Load Balancing. Here is it is that when you're talking about DNS server load balancing, multiple IP addresses, okay, will be configured for a single particular domain name, and that domain name may be consist of a cluster of servers, okay, cluster of servers. So now, based on some round robin policies, okay, based on some round robin policies, each server, each request will be given to each particular different servers. Okay, so that is DNS server load balancing. When you're talking about Microsoft Network Load Balancing, that software is actually installed on the physical servers itself. Okay, in the different types of physical servers which are going to service a request. So when you're going to install on the servers, okay, now when the request comes up, so the client only sees one IP address. Okay, so for all this cluster, only one IP address the client will see. So it will give that request to that particular IP address, and each and this packet actually is received by each of the servers in that server cluster. And this load balancing device which is installed in that servers, it will filter out the packet means it will see whether the uh, server can process this packet. Is it capable? Does it have a workload which where it cannot do it. So it will do that processing, and if it is able to process that server, it is fed to the server processing, or else that packet will be dropped. So that is the load balancing. Okay, that is software based load balancing. Okay, that is, that can be run either on the physical servers or on the virtual machine. Okay, uh, so this is the software based technique for load balancing. Okay, balancing the client workload. The other technique is the storm control technique. So in this storm control technique, so basically here the aim is, usually it is done on LAN or virtual LAN traffic. So the main thing here is to uh, av- avoid disruption of, okay, avoid disruption of the regular, that is normal traffic which is running in a LAN or VLAN traffic caused due to the storm. So storm is basically uh, flooding of frames. Okay, flooding of frames. So that flooding of frames can either happen due to, sometimes the users are requesting multiple services, which multiple requests which are being denied, sometimes because of some errors in the network configuration, multiple packets are being released. Okay, so these are some of the causes for the storm. Okay, so in the LAN switch, okay, in the LAN switch, the storm control can be enabled. Okay, that storm control can be enabled. So when you're enabling that storm control, what does it basically do is, it will monitor all the inbound frames. Okay, whatever frames which are coming to that LAN, that will, it will be analyzing. So when it is talking about analyzing, it basically sees how many types, or it will see what are the different types or traffic types of packets which are being received at the LAN. Okay, so it can be either a unicast or a multicast or a broadcast type. Okay, or sometimes if you're talking about VM traffic also, so suppose sometimes too many VM migration requests are coming, or sometimes too many requests for IP storage is coming, or sometimes it is coming for FC storage, or it is just VM management traffic. So it will analyze what are the different types of the traffic which it is receiving. Okay, and what does it do is, it calculate the total number of frames, okay, of each specific type, okay, over 1 second interval. So it will and count the total number of frames of each specific type over 1 second interval. Okay, and it will compare that total, whatever the result is, it will compare it with it, which it has a predefined threshold for each specific type of traffic. Okay, so the LAN will have a specific threshold for each type of traffics. Okay, it will compare it with that, and if it is crossing that threshold, if it is crossing that threshold amount which we can see here, so this is a threshold for a particular type of packet. So we can see at time instance 0 to t1, the traffic is fine, means it is not crossing the threshold. But at time instance t1, it can see that 1 second interval, see here 1 second interval, it can see that it is crossing that threshold. In that case, what it does is, it will block that type of traffic. It will block that type of traffic, that is t2, we can see it is a dashed line, means it is blocked, and it will again observe for 1 second interval. And if it is not crossing the threshold, see here at time instance t2 to t3, it has not crossed the threshold, then what does it do at time next interval onwards, it will allow that type of traffic. This is the analysis it do. That is controlling the storm of packets, that is, or frames which are coming to the LAN or the VLAN traffic. Okay, so so just understand this. If at 1 second interval, if at some time instance, okay, if it has crossed that specific threshold which is already predefined in the LAN or VLAN, uh, uh, what does it do is, it will block that traffic, and it will again observe for 1 second interval. If it has reduced, if the traffic has dropped below the threshold, if the traffic has dropped below the threshold, at the next time interval, that traffic will be allowed to pass again. Okay, so that is the concept of storm control here. Okay, so basically the storm control has switch ports, okay, which block the traffic if it is crossed the threshold. Okay, and it will also block till the traffic type. or the traffic type or the packet type which was coming into that LAN tribe has reduced below the threshold, only then at the next instance it will be allowed to proceed. Okay, so this is the storm control type. Okay, the next method is the NIC teaming here. Okay, so when you're talking about NIC teaming here, so it is logically grouping of, okay, physical NICs which is connected to a virtual switch. So we know that each virtual switch will have dedicated physical NIC, may or may not have, but it will not share the physical NICs. So if a virtual switch have multiple uh, multiple physical NICs, so we are going to group them. So this we have already seen. If we are grouping, that means we are not going to use them simultaneously. So if there are three physical NICs to a virtual switch, what we will do is one or two might be active, the other one will be like acting as a standby. So this standby NIC will be used to adopt during some failure which has happened in the existing running physical NICs. Okay, so that is kind of the load balancing and failover, which is done using the grouping technique here. Okay, so uh, this we have already seen when we are talking about these example scenarios. Okay, when we are talking about virtual switch and physical NIC. Okay, the other one is limit and share. So we have seen only the limit and share for the resources which can be provisioned for a virtual machine. Okay, so parameters which we have seen for controlling the resource utilization by a virtual machine, we have seen limit, share, and there was one more. Okay, so here that is reservation, that was a third parameter. So here we are only talking about the two parameters. So these two parameters are basically to define the bandwidth which the VM is going to consume. Okay, so limit means here is and where it is incorporated, that is also important here in this terminology. So limit and share will be implemented at distributed virtual switch. Okay, distributed virtual switch. So these are the configurable parameters which will be playing around with. So what does it do is it will allocate. So limit will allocate maximum bandwidth for per traffic type. Okay, it will set the maximum bandwidth per traffic type. So traffic type here, as we have already seen, we have seen VM, IP storage, VM management. Okay, so all these traffic types are there. Okay, so what does limit does is, so it will put a maximum bandwidth on each particular traffic type. Okay, and it should see that these bandwidth maximum limit is not exceeded by each of these traffic type. Okay, and when you're specifying a bandwidth, it should be specified in Mbps, and this can be applied to the whole of the NIC team. NIC teams means logical group of the physical NICs. So it can be applied to the NIC team. The other parameter here is the share type. Okay, the share type, it's the same concept. It's based on priority. So here we assign priority to the different traffic types. Say suppose one is easy example is, suppose the iSCSI traffic type. Okay, iSCSI access traffic types is given a value of 1000 priority, but VM management traffic, okay, VM migration traffic, that is given a priority of 2000. So in that case, more bandwidth will be given to VM migration traffic type instead of iSCSI type when there is a resource contention, right? So this is the share and limit parameter, configurable parameter, which controls how much bandwidth you are going to allocate to each traffic type. Okay, so this actually ensures that the business critical applications get required bandwidth because you have specified the priority and limit. Okay, both of the things you are specifying. So it ensures that business critical applications are not they are given the required type of services which it has which it requires, or it is stated in the service level agreements. Okay, so this is implemented a distributed virtual switch, and it means that you are going to incorporate or the analysis is going to be done at physical NICs or NICT. Okay, right. So this is all about limit and share. The other technique is the traffic shaping. Okay, so in this traffic shaping, it also earlier case was also about controlling the bandwidth, okay, network bandwidth for each traffic type. Here also it is about controlling the network bandwidth, okay. Now the main thing here is this is to ensure business critical applications uh, are not, they are not uh, impacted by sometimes because of the overcommitment, okay, they are not impacted, to ensure that the this traffic shaping is done. So this also can be configured at virtual or distributed virtual switch or at port group level. Okay, port group level means we are actually talking about port group level means in the virtual switch we have uplink port groups. Okay, so at that level also we can incorporate the traffic shaping. So here the three parameters which is used to do the traffic shaping is average bandwidth, peak bandwidth, and burst size. So when you're talking about average bandwidth, peak bandwidth, from the figure itself, I think it is clear. In the average bandwidth, you are going to specify how much of the minimum average type of traffic which you can allow, okay, for a particular request, okay, for a particular traffic type. So that actually that allowed data traffic usually is like an average value, okay, an average value. Sometimes there might be more traffic type, okay, but that spike in that traffic will be for a short duration, okay, that spike in the traffic, average traffic, will be there sometimes, because sometimes some issue might have happened, so sometimes the user is requesting too much request, but it is not being serviced, okay. So but that duration will be for a short period of time, okay. So that short period of time is when the traffic spikes, that is called as burst, okay, burst, burst, okay. So we'll see the other parameter also, and then we'll come back to the burst and discuss about burst size also. So we have the other terminology called peak bandwidth. So this peak bandwidth is like the maximum data transfer allowed, okay, without queuing or dropping the frame, without queuing or dropping the frame. That is important. Okay, so this peak bandwidth value is usually kept higher than the average bandwidth, obviously, because average bandwidth, it's like the usual type of traffic which is analyzed over the time. Okay, and peak bandwidth is for the uh, extreme cases when sometimes if we have too much load, what is the maximum traffic which is allowed. Okay, so that is the peak bandwidth. So coming to the discussion of burst here. So what is the burst traffic here? So sometimes, as I told, the traffic rate exceeds the average bandwidth limit. Okay, average bandwidth limit, though it will be for a small duration, but it might be there. Okay, so what it should ensure that the burst size, that is the bandwidth multiplied by the time, it should not exceed the peak bandwidth limit. That is the only condition here. If it exceeds that is if it exceeds this burst size, that is bandwidth multiplied by time, so either the remaining frames, okay, either the remaining frames will be queued for the later transmission, okay, or else if that queue is also full, in that case that packets will be dropped. So that is the traffic shaping here. Means for a small duration, uh, if a peak traffic is there, so that traffic, it will be measured, that is burst size will be measured, it is based on bandwidth multiplied by time. And if it is greater than the peak bandwidth, okay, if it is greater than that particular burst size, in that case, what happens here is either it will be queued for later transmission or it will be dropped, because we can see here in that burst size, it is still under the peak bandwidth limit. So as I told you, peak bandwidth is like maximum data transfer rate without queuing or dropping the frames. So either here the in the queue it will be filled up because it is not being able to process at that time. If the queue is already full, that packets will be dropped. So this is the traffic shaping technique. Okay. So finally, the last technique for network management traffic is the multipathing. So by the term multipathing itself and this figure itself is clear. So we have multiple paths, okay, for uh, the VM to access its external storage array through host-based adapters, okay, multiple path array. So why do we need a multiple path? So obviously, if it's only a single dedicated link, okay, some, sometimes the HBA might be at risk. Sometimes the switch ports or these external storage controller port might be failed. Okay, in that case, that link will not be active, and VM will not be allowed to access the storage array or its particular NUL. So in that case, what happens is we provide multiple paths for a particular virtual machine to get access to its storage array. Okay, to its storage array, and that is nothing but the multipathing. So here an alternate path. So suppose here HBA and this port is not working. So an alternate path is it can link to this HBA2 and then it can start the communication. So the all recognizing an alternate path, that there is an input output alternate path to the LUL, okay, and enabling the failover, okay, that is called as multipathing. Okay, multipathing is basically mm, there will be a link, okay, that is a physical server can access to other elements, okay, through multiple paths. So enabling that is called as multipathing. uh, so here basically this is kind of path failover. Path failover means a path has failed, so the alternate path has to be detected, and and that failure has to be will do that, the alternate path will do the failover of the failed path. Okay, that is the technique here called multipathing, means identifying an alternate path that is communicating from HPA to the storage array, and that alternate path has to be activated. That is called as uh, multipathing. Okay, so this completes our virtualization of data center, okay, at network level. So now we'll move on to the virtualization of data center at desktop and application. So this is the shortest of all of the other topics. Okay, so this only has two topics, that is desktop and application. So when you're talking about virtualization and desktop and application, in the traditional system, in a traditional system, there was a huge dependency between the hardware, that is the Swiss physical PC which we are using. There is a tight coupling between that physical PC, its underlying operating system, application, and user data. Means for each application, different users will have different states. So that is user state here. Okay, so there was tight coupling before, but with the the virtualization is trying to break that dependency. So the desktop virtualization, which we'll discuss in the next session, basically isolate the only the hardware part. Okay, isolate the hardware part from its OS, application, and user data. So still the OS, application, and user data are tightly coupled in desktop virtualization. Only the hardware part is isolated. But in the application virtualization, actually it is able to virtualize, means it is able to separate this application part from the OS and also from the hardware part. So this has achieved one more level of breaking the dependency, that is application virtualization. So that is why it is written here, desktop virtualization is only able to isolate hardware from the underlying operating system application. So still these three are tightly coupled. In application virtualization, they're able to break the dependency of this application from the corresponding OS and hardware. So how does it do this virtualization? How does it implement this desktop and application virtualization? We'll discuss in detail. So as usual, we'll talk about first the desktop virtualization, why it is required. Okay, so for manageability concerns, so basically here is, if your laptop is lost and if it is tightly coupled, means in your laptop everything is stored. Okay, in that case you don't want it, um, you don't want it to uh, if your laptop is lost, you don't want your application, your related data to be, stolen from you. So this desktop virtualization provides you with an advantage that it is isolating your hardware from the application OS, your related data, so your data will still be secure. Okay, so that is because of the manageability concerns, and that is additionally actually security concerns, and obviously cost, because the main problem here is when you're using traditional desktop, so sometimes you need to update your desktop. Okay, in that case sometimes that hard application will not be supporting. Okay, then you have to say the compatibility of these two. So all those are issues. So in order to avoid facing such issues, it is better that your hardware is isolated from the underlying application, its data, its user data, etc. And also manageability concern in as another. So as I told you, your PC slowly will become traditional and new system will come up. Okay, so based on that your application has to adopt. So all that manageability concern, so suppose some application will be upgraded, okay, but your PC might not be supporting because it is not going to change like how the application is going to be updated. So that manageability concern can also be mapped using desktop virtualization. Okay, so the desktop virtualization is basically you're going to virtualize or you're going to break the dependency of hardware with underlying dependency. So hardware will be any thin client. Okay, hardware will be here any thin client, and they're going to access that application using an internet. Okay, and that application will either be hosted in a particular VMs, or you might be getting it as a session. So two types of desktop virtualization is possible, that also we will see. Okay, so just make sure that you have to have a thin client so that you can access it over the LAN or WAN. Okay. Okay, so the other benefits which I have already discussed is enablement of thin clients. Okay, so enablement of thin clients means basically the thin clients actually have lesser of operational expenditure. Okay, they be and the lifetime of a thin client is actually twice that of a standard PC. Okay, uh, the other advantage here is improved data security. So since now the data, user data, your application, your user data is not going to reside in the thin client. It's all there in the one particular server, that is a centralized server. In that case, that helps in improved data security even though your PC or thin client might be lost. And it simplifies data backup. That data backup means you can actually access your data from any other thin clients. So you don't have to migrate your data each and every time you're going to use a different thin client. So already it will be available to you. The other one is simplified PC maintenance. As I told you before, the thin client is easy to do because your application, if it needs an upgrade, that can be done centrally. Okay, so you don't have to be sitting and doing the update, which again requires, which you had to check before, because it might do a hardware incompatibility or give a hardware incompatibility issue. So those issues you don't have to face now. At centralized level, the application can be upgraded, patched. Okay, and also because of anywhere access like work from home. Okay, if you are given work from home or a remote application, so that flexibility of access is also enabled using the desktop virtualization method. Right. So the two techniques for desktop virtualization are remote desktop service and virtual desktop infrastructure. So here, first we'll see the remote desktop service. So by remote desktop services, basically here, it's like sessions are given. Okay, sessions are open for each client request. Okay, so that session is like a complete. The user will be given a complete visual of the how their application will look, and they will be seeing as if it is their own application which they're actually running in their system. Okay, so that is the remote desktop service. So it will be like a terminal service. So remote desktop service is also called as terminal service because the central server will be creating sessions for each of the applications requested by the particular user. Okay, so each session will be having so multiple sessions can be hosted in a remote desktop service. Okay, we'll see the benefits little later after the virtual desktop. Okay, but here the in VDI virtual desktop infrastructure, the main thing which you can observe here is in virtual desktop infrastructure, the terminals are not given to each users. Here, for each user, a VM is itself being hosted in the particular server. So just imagine a VM hosting means that VM will have its dedicated resources, right? Dedicated OS, dedicated resources, dedicated bandwidth. So from here itself, you can see which is more advantageous. If you are giving a session, that means the entire server's bandwidth resources are being shared between multiple sessions. But when you're talking about virtual machines, some amount of has to be given no to each VM so that it can get powered on. So in hosting individual VM means dedicating some type of resources, some amount of resources dedicatedly to these VMs. So from this figure itself, you can actually do the comparison here. So RDS means it supports multiple users, okay, per server, but VDI has less number of supporting simultaneous connections. So you can see here, RDS solution can actually support 250 more per server, users per server, but VDI solution can only support 30 to 45 users per support. Okay, the other thing is RDS is easy to implement, okay, because it is only a session, but VDI is more complex. Okay, VDI is more complex. The other benefit is when you are using RDS, it is easy to do the management of user sessions, but in VDI, that management of user session is little difficult because it involves hosting of VM, and in that VM we have to make sure that VM does not do resource contention, etc. Okay, so these are the main thing, but the only disadvantage of RDS, okay, the disadvantage of RDS is uh, RDS is basically it's a server, right? Centralized server which is hosting this desktop application. Sometimes some application will only be created, okay, will only be created for running in desktop OS. But RDS is basically a server, so it might not be compatible with server OS. So some applications which are not compatible to run in server operating system, they cannot use RDS environment. That is the only disadvantage with RDS. Okay, and expensive also, RDS is less expensive compared to the VDI. Okay, so these are the things. In VDI we have these components, that is endpoint devices, connection broker, okay, VM, execution server. So these are the three types of device. So endpoint device is basically the thin client. So we'll discuss about the connection broker and execution broker. Okay, so when you're talking about the connection broker here. Okay, so first I think in we have VM hosting or execution server, right? So when you're talking about VM hosting or execution server, so execution server means a host of servers will be there. Okay, a host of server will be there, so they are going to serve the request for each users. Okay, so how does it serve these requests is with so each server will have multiple virtual machines, okay, multiple virtual machines, and these virtual machines either can be specifically dedicated to a particular user, or what we can do is we can create a pool of VMs will be there, and say suppose the organization required 100 virtual machines. Okay, so initially what we'll do, we'll create a VM pool with only 50 VMs, and that will be given to the organization. So their concurrent requirement might be 50, but they will consider for a peak bandwidth. That's why they might have requested for 100. So a pool allows you to do overcommitment. So only 50 users are given to a particular organization, and as and when it needs, either dynamically or manually, if we will add more number of virtual machines as the organization requires. Okay, so and also when you're using the VM execution server, usually the type 1 hypervisor is more beneficial because it interacts directly with the hardware. Type 2 is usually not used because it does not support much number of density of VMs. Okay, so that is why type 1 hypervisor is more suitable. Okay, so other thing is about connection broker. So as I told you, if a particular VM is particularly for a single VMs, we actually don't need a connection broker in VDI infrastructure. So when do we need connection broker? So when I told you about VM pools means 50 users will be given to say 5 users. So to which user that VM will be mapped? That thing is done by the connection broker here. So at that case, we actually need a connection broker. So it is responsible for establishing and managing the connection. Okay, so that is why sometimes we might not need a connection broker if that VM is dedicated to a particular user. But if that particular VM pools are being dedicated to n number of users, in that case, we need the connection broker to manage and establish the connection. Okay. So that is connection broker. So VDI benefits we'll see here. So we have seen how RDS is beneficial compared to VDI. So VDI is again it's a centralized deployment and management. So it improves business continuity and disaster recovery. So how does it do business continuity and disaster recovery? That is a separate module itself. So just understand here instead of creating each virtual image VM image for each VMs which are going to be hosted, a single VM image will be used and that will be replicated to host these VMs. To understand that using a single image and replicating them, you need will understand it when business continuity module will be taken up, which is the next module. Okay, when that is taken, this will be this you will be able to understand how uh, VDI is beneficial if we are going to make use of single image, okay, to replicate multiple VMs. Okay. So one more thing is, when this we are talking about VDI, okay, it is not suitable for high-end graphic application because there is network latency which we have to consider because everything has to go already internet we have to use but connection broker has to be there, right, to provide the connectivity. So latency is one issue. So the performance of such applications which requires high end graphic, that will be not so assured when you're using VDI. Okay, VDI, that is virtual desktop infrastructure. Okay, so these are the benefits and some considerations which you have to do when you're using VDA, right? So the thing here is, we have just seen that only the hardware is being virtualized from the underlying OS, from the underlying OS, its application and its user related data, right? So that is user state virtualization. But now what we are going to talk about is virtualizing the application from OS and its underlying hardware. Okay, so the some of the uh, key challenges which they have to ensure while doing the user state virtualization is, um, that user has to be easily migrated when the operating system has to there is a need for updation of operating system. Other thing is when user is accessing an application from multiple devices, so how you're going to do the backup of all those state into again provide it to in another thin system. So how you're going to collect those user state and provide it in again another. The third thing is the backup. Suppose if you have used lost the thin client but still the user state is stored somewhere and that has to be backed up and provided it to via another thin client. So these are the few challenges which they had to do, face and overcome for providing user state virtualization. Okay, so user state basically include only the user state. Okay, which in user's data means it related to the corresponding application, and if that application is related to some OS settings, so that OS configuration setting. Okay, that is user state. So how we are going to incorporate user state virtualization is what we are going to see in the application virtualization. So this is a uh, thing short concept. Okay, in the application virtualization basically you are going to present the application as it is to the user. Okay, so here, uh, what we are going to do here is that application itself is going to be provided like uh, an executable file, standalone executable file. That is one way of providing application virtualization. The another way of providing the application virtualization is when you're accessing the thin client at that moment, what you need in that application, only that is only that is provided or installed at the thin client. As and when you're progressing, as and when you are progressing ahead, the other required settings will be installed dynamically. So these are the two ways in which the application virtualization can be provided. Okay, so this actually helps in see, suppose if I am using two multiple versions of the same application, sometimes it won't be incompatible. Okay, so when you're providing application virtualization, that problem is not there because each application is running in an isolated environment. That is the main thing. Okay, so main thing means the application, as I told you, standalone executable file will consist of user data, its related application, and its related OS configuration settings. Okay, so The two deployment methods are application encapsulation. As I told you, it's like a standalone executable file, and application streaming means as and when the user is using such an application in the thin client, related settings will be delivered to the client. Okay, and the rest of the settings will be delivered as on demand, or sometimes we have to request and it will be getting uh, installed. So these are the two ways in which you can actually install or deploy the application virtualization. So in the application encapsulation, that standalone executable file can be either obtained in a USB or in some other local storage disk. Okay, so that storage disk will have the built-in agents which will do the installation in your thin client. But in application streaming, the thin clients will have that agents will be installed when you are going to access that application. Okay, so these are the two different types of application virtualization. Okay, so we have completed the application and desktop virtualization. We'll complete the session with the benefits discussion. So when you're talking about application virtualization, as I told you, the application is not installed in your thin client. It is only stored as a executable storage, which you can remove it. Okay, or as I told you, like on streaming. So this helps in easy deployment or retirement. Second thing is image management. So uh, the application are completely separated from OS. Okay, so here the OS, even if the OS patches and upgrades have to be there, it does not affect the application because you have a executable file which actually have the required OS settings. The other thing is, as I told you, if there are two versions of applications which is being run by two VMs, so there might be a conflict. Or in a particular system, if there are two versions of applications, so that might be not compatible. So that problem is also not there in application virtualization, because all the required settings which you need to have when you're going to run that application will be provided in that standalone executable file. Okay, so these are the benefits of our application virtualization. So I hope you understood the basic difference between desktop and application virtualization. Two methods to do desktop virtualization is RDS and VDI. What are the benefits? What are the limitation of RDS? And in VDI, we seen the components also, and how RDS is advantages to VDI, but what is its limitation, that also we have seen. Then we have also covered the application virtualization and its benefit, and two methods to do the application virtualization also we have seen. Okay, so this completes today's portion. So I guess last 2 minutes are there. So I'll post the form link, okay, in the Teams, and you can access it from the post. Okay, so I'll stop the recording here and stop the screen share. Thank you all. Stop the screen share option.